The Lord be with you. Welcome, and thank you so much for being here. I know for many of you, 3 p.m. on a Sunday is like, we already did this. Why am I here again? Thank you so much, for being here. And also, thank you for all you do and all you bring and all you give in your roles at IAC. You wouldn't be here unless there was some place in which you were releasing the gospel that heals together. Thank you so much for being here for those reasons, right? For all that you do. And also, thank you for doing everything you do outside of the context of IAC, because we know that IAC is not the only thing you do. It's not your only place of ministry. It's not your only context for what you have been given to give in the world. Today, we really want to do 2 things. First, we just want to celebrate you, and that's why we have bundt cakes, and that's why we have axes. Yes, it was to bring you here. I mean, the registration shot up after we started announcing about the axes. I mean, it was solid. They're getting set up as we speak right now. But if we could keep the windows clear, that'd be great today. But it's A, to celebrate you, and B, to invite us all into a really important set of trainings that we want you to be equipped in, not only for your roles here in IAC, although that is the excuse, right, and the reason, but also for your roles in your life out there. Because what we're going to be talking about is extraordinarily important, not just within the church, but within the world, in seeing the kingdom of God come in our midst. Okay? The genesis for this training can be found in scriptures like Psalm 10. Okay? I'm going to read it to you. You, Lord, hear the desire of the afflicted. You encourage them and you listen to their cry, defending the fatherless and the oppressed, so that mere earthly mortals will never again strike terror. Now, how many people can identify with the feeling of, you're reading through the scriptures, especially maybe something in the Old Testament, you come along a passage like this, and you're like, oh, what does that mean for today? Right? It uses a language that maybe needs to be translated, right, into a little bit more modern speak. So one of the words in here, defending the fatherless and the oppressed, so that mere earthly mortals will never again strike terror. We think oppression, right? All kinds of things might come to mind. Some of them modern, maybe some of them historical, maybe some of them societal, maybe some of them individual, but I think it's helpful in passages like this one when we look at, okay, God is on the side of the oppressed, that God listens to the cries of the afflicted. Okay, what does that look like in our day? Whoop. Sorry, the spacing did not work there. I think one of the things that comes under that biblical category of oppression is abuse. Here's our working definition for abuse today. Abuse occurs when a person in a position of power and trust uses that position to exploit or violate a person who is more vulnerable. Abuse occurs when a person in a position of power and trust uses that position to exploit or violate a person who is more vulnerable. Okay. Now, abuse, according to this definition, is multifaceted, right? It could be financial, it could be domineering leadership, it could be sexual. There are many different domains in which it could occur, and we're going to talk about some of those today. But the foundational piece of abuse is someone in a position of power and trust, using that position for their own ends, right? For their own benefit. And within the world, opportunities exist in mass for abuse to happen. And also within the church, opportunities for abuse exist in mass, especially when you consider the spiritual power that comes from being a clergy person or being a team leader or being a volunteer leader in any context that you might be in. And that spiritualization can often take that abuse and make it even worse, make it even more damaging. Now here at IAC, we say that we want to be about receiving and releasing the gospel that heals together. And we talk about that healing being multidimensional. It's the healing of our relationship with God, but also it's our healing of our relationships with one another, healing of our relationships with ourselves. And part of the healing we seek here at IAC and ask God for is healing in this space of abuse. We seek healing for individuals who have been abused, and that's part of the larger work of ministry. It requires partnering with counselors and social workers, et cetera, governmental entities. But it also involves healing of our community, right? Because there are often a lot of misconceptions, tendencies to silence that keep us from preventing and addressing potential abuse in our midst. And that's what we want to focus on today. That's the focus of these different trainings we're going to be doing in between the axe throwing and the button cakes, right? This is what our focus is going to be. I want to say 3 key truths. Oh, my clicker is no longer, there it is. Oh. There we go. 3 key truths in this conversation that we're going to dive into today. The first is that abuse at IAC is not impossible. It could happen here. There's sometimes a myth in church cultures. They're like, oh, we're all a bunch of good people, like this couldn't happen here. It can happen here. But abuse is also not inevitable. It can be prevented. There are ways that we can build a culture together that help it be prevented. And then if it happens, to deal with it in ways that bring accountability to offenders and healing to victims. So our aim for IAC is to build a culture of holistic safety. Now, what do we mean by that? There are different dimensions of abuse, right, that we talked about earlier: financial, domineering leadership, sexual, regarding adults and minors, et cetera, et cetera. There are lots of different dimensions to this, but we want a culture that is seeking to be a safe place across those dimensions, so that people are not hurt by abuse that is prevented in our midst. And if abuse happens in our midst, we know confidently how to deal with that. Now, that culture of holistic safety is anchored in robust and widely known and understood policies, right? You got to have policies for these things for the sake of clarity, not just of like butt covering, for the sake of clarity of everyone being on the same page, knowing this is what's okay, this is not. This is what we do when something happens, this is not, et cetera, et cetera. We need that clarity among all of us at the church so that we are all empowered to, when we see something, we say something. I get to go to England a couple times a year over the last couple of years, and I always take public transit. And if you've been to England lately on public transit, there's this phrase that they say so often, it gets absolutely beat in your head. Does anybody know it? See it, say it, sorted. Yes, in that beautiful British accent. It's like burned into me on like 4 rides on the Underground. And what they're trying to do is create a culture where if you see something, you can confidently know who you can talk to about it so that it can be dealt with, right? That's what we're hoping for out of trainings like this one. That we would know what we're seeing, that we'd be confident to say it so that it can be sorted as we walk forward. Now, there's 2 main areas that we're going to be talking about today. One is our general IAC sexual misconduct policy, okay? And another is our specific minor protection policy. Now, there's more that goes into holistic safety than these 2 things, but these are two of the big ones that we're going to be focusing on today. And what's going to be happening is we're going to have 3 different groups. You got 3 different name tags, right? I'm going to let Bonnie come and explain how all this is going to work. But you're going to be rotating around to different rooms and spaces talking about these things. One group will start out in the courtyard throwing axes. Another group will be here in the sanctuary. Another group will be downstairs talking about different things, and then we're going to rotate around. Bonnie's going to talk about exactly how and why that's happening. But again, it may be tempting to go into this next space and forget the why. Right? Okay, we're talking about policies, we're talking about reporting, all these kind of technical details. What's the why? The why is a culture of holistic safety so that we might see the kingdom of God come in our midst, so that we might see the healing of God spring up among us. Okay? That's why we're here. That's why we're doing what we're doing. And also something that needs to be said before we go, two things. One is how incredibly thankful I am to everyone who's participating today. But Pastor Aaron and Bonnie had a lot of hand in putting this together today. We are so thankful for you guys, for all your work in that space. Maddie and Amanda will also be presenting. I also would like to note that Bonnie said if I went under time, that it was a miracle akin to walking on water. And I have achieved it. Onward!
All right, well, we're going to jump right in here. We have about 20 minutes, and if we wrap up a little early, then we'll leave some time for discussion and questions. And so moving right along from where Ken left off with this culture of holistic safety, we're going to continue to talk about that culture of holistic safety a little bit and then get into some policies, specifically in this room around our sexual misconduct policy. So that's what we'll be focusing on in our time together in this room. All right. So one thing that the one question this might beg as we are looking at like these policies and like how nitty gritty it is and the specifics here is this a legal or fear response? And we would say 100% no. Actually, this is not something actually that we're avoiding or guarding ourselves against as much as it is something we're moving towards. We want this to be moving us towards flourishing and thriving and caring for one another well. And that means it's something that it's about loving God, because we know that God comes to the rescue of the oppressed. And it's about loving people. We know people who are affected even if we don't realize it. And so that fundamental commandment of loving God and loving others, that's what we're after here, not a fear response, not something legalistic. Again, less about what we're avoiding and more about what we're moving towards, even though we, of course, want to avoid things like sexual misconduct as we pursue these policies. Another perhaps like question or objection would be maybe like this doesn't feel like family. Maybe this feels like robotic or forced or any number of words. Or maybe another way of saying that would be it doesn't feel natural. It doesn't feel natural to have to learn these policies and adhere to these things. And it might feel strange to learn to navigate policies like these. But there are some important things we want to remember in this. And one is that IAC is an extended family, and we have lots of people visiting this church community regularly. Another thing is that we're growing, and as we grow, that will require us to have stronger structures. And then the third thing is we seek to be a healthy family, and healthy is not always comfortable. It's not always natural feeling, but healthy families have clear expectations and accountability. And maybe we don't come from families or churches or workplaces that have those clear expectations and accountability. And I wonder if this actually, for some of us at least, could feel like a sacrifice. Maybe it's a sacrifice to do things in this new way, but this is the way we are called to live, to lay down our lives for one another, especially for those who are vulnerable, knowing that is the way of Jesus, that we can sacrifice our comfort for the sake of health and flourishing. And just, one other important thing to consider here is that it is good news that our own righteousness in these things is not enough. So we don't trust in ourselves and our own goodness, and that is a big reason why we have these policies in place. Not just simply for like that extreme, like bad, evil person over here at like kind of the end of the spectrum, though we acknowledge that there are those who have the explicit intent to harm, but just also all of us who are sinful and vulnerable and weak When we have policies, when we have a culture of holistic safety, we are freed up to not rely on our own goodness. And that is important and is good news. All right, so we want, as Ken was talking about earlier, to prevent these abuses of power. Some of the specific ways we pursue that here at IAC are fostering the overall health of all of our leaders. There's many ways that happens, but we have, one thing that stood out to me as I was pondering this is we have regular conversations that are hard. We have hard conversations in all areas, and that actually helps us to have hard conversations in this area. We have application processes for volunteer leaders. We care about volunteer leaders as well and their well-being, their health, their training. An important, essential component to our culture at IAC is team leadership. Again, that kind of goes back to that we don't depend on the goodness of one leader or one person, but we need each other both to flourish as we pursue ministry, but also in these areas of holistic safety in our policies. We also have a triangle that is maybe not exclusive to the Anglican Church, but it is unique that we have a bishop, we have a rector, and we have a lay church council who are holding each other accountable, who are all part of the process of helping when things go awry or when issues come up. And so all of these realities are cared for within IAC in a number of ways, these realities of how we pursue this holistic safety. And that includes our specific written out policies. So we need not just a culture, but also specific spelled out policies. So the sexual misconduct policy that Aaron's going to be talking about in more detail here soon, it specifically seeks to prevent sexual abuse and misconduct. That gets integrated in a number of ways. In the staff culture, we have ongoing training for all staff. All staff are equipped to receive any report of misconduct at any time. So that is something we want to highlight. That's really important for you to know. Any staff member is equipped to receive any report of misconduct at any time, but it goes beyond the staff team as well. It is something that is a congregational culture. And some of the ways we desire that to play out are this idea, which I think Ken mentioned earlier. If you see something, say something, even if what you see is merely uncomfortable. Even if you do not perceive that there are ill intentions behind something, we want to promote this culture of seeing something and saying something. We have continuing trainings, not only for staff, but with our kid and student teams, which you'll be hearing about a little bit more downstairs in the basement. We see every volunteer in every area of ministry as a mandatory reporter for child and vulnerable adult abuse, not just staff. I don't actually think we're required to do that, to see every volunteer as a mandatory reporter, but that is something we feel is important to hold this culture of holistic safety. And then we want to, like we're doing today, have a continuing congregation-wide training. And it's important to also recognize today that we hope that what we're talking about is not just for what happens when you are in an official IAC context or associating with people at our church, but that this will trickle into all areas of life, because these are good and solid policies and things to pursue that are not unique just to the church. So I'm going to turn it over to Aaron to talk a little bit more about our specific policies.
Yeah, Amanda, thanks. most of you guys come to church here, right? On a Sunday morning, you're here. And there's this really interesting moment that happens every Sunday where we've been at the table, and then we come down here, and there's a team of people that are offering bread and wine, and we're celebrating what Jesus has done to bring life into the world and into us. And it was a number of months ago, maybe even back in the spring. Like the whole church usually comes forward, not everybody, but the vast majority, adults, but also children. And we had one situation a couple of months ago where a child came up and received bread and then was coming over to receive from the cup, and the person that was sharing the cup was just like overcome with compassion for them and caring for them and leaned down and put their hand on them just like that. Which, in our context, we bless children all the time, all those things. And in that moment, can I say that that person, that leader, didn't actually do a wrong thing? Parents were there. It was normal for this interaction. But we had a parishioner that was, one of y'all maybe, that was out and watching and then later told us about it. Like, hey, is that okay? Was that appropriate? Was that an instance of misconduct? Like, was there consent? How did that go? And I want to affirm how right an observation that was. That is so important for us. What we want to do is to continue to invite you to know that you're empowered to ask a question, to make a report, to see something, like Amanda just said it a minute ago, that it's merely uncomfortable. Like, wait, what happened there? That was outstanding. We loved that. It gave us an opportunity to check in with that family. Like, hey, was that okay? Like, did we overstep? And to place the whole church in humility to say we may have made a mistake, which is what we did. We went to that family and we walked through the conversation with them. And then we walked through the conversation with our volunteer to be like, wait, so this is what happened, and how do we think about this in a setting like this? And we got to walk with the family through what was their experience of that. And it created an opportunity for us to live out our IAC values. In particular, the values of being authentic and relational and generous with one another. It was such a good thing. So we have these policies. I'm going to walk briefly through our sexual misconduct policy. But we have these policies so that you know that you can ask a question. So that you know that if you see something, that there is somebody that you can tell because something might not be right. So that you know that we can be advocates for caring for one another. Right? That's really important for us. Right? To create this ongoing culture of holistic safety. That moment was such a win. Because we can see how this is what's happening within IAC because of this work. In 2021, we refreshed our two primary policies related to safety, sexual misconduct, as well as our minor protection policy. These were vetted in the church, from the diocese, from people outside of the Anglican Church altogether, so that we had multiple eyes on these documents. So when you hear these, know that it wasn't someone at IAC that just made them up one day. This was a shared work for people in IAC and outside of IAC. And they prioritize really four kinds of things that we want you to be aware of. First, that it's team-driven. There's always more than one person in the know, which should hopefully give you some confidence that if you have something to report, you know it's not going to go to just one person. You know that now you've entered in to some kind of shared hearing and understanding that something might have gone wrong. And that we can act on it. And it's not just one person acting on it, but there's a team of people engaged in that conversation to ensure that things are going to go well, even when something hasn't already gone well. That matters. It's trauma-informed. There's an author and a speaker on these things, Diane Langford. I would really encourage, if you're interested in what trauma-informed means, or survivor-focused, actually, she deals with both of these. Strongly encourage you to look her up, Diane Langford. She leads an organization, writes books, speaks. She spoke into our policies. She's part of the training that all of our staff have received, along with an organization called GRACE, which stands for Godly Response in Abuse in the Christian Environment. So we've brought in experts from this to help us understand what trauma-informed and survivor-focused really means. This is a shift. If you're in the church world or maybe in a nonprofit or in another kind of human resources type space, these two terms, trauma-informed and survivor-focused, those are relatively new, starting maybe 10 to 15 years ago. And it's one of the ways that we are trying to learn from those experts and continue to follow in the way that they're teaching us. And we want to also prioritize that we're going to continue to seek truth, right? That we have a process that allows for us to understand what happens. We want a process that allows us to understand both the perspective of the victim as well as the accused, and to create safety processes so that we can hear both. That's actually really important. We're going to talk about that a little bit more. On that note, however, and there's another place I'm going to repeat what I'm saying now, for this truth-seeking, for you to make a report, you don't have to know 100%. You are not the investigative arm. If it's just something that was questionable or curious or that it just felt uncomfortable, say something. You don't have to know that a thing happened for you to say, I don't know if this happened, but I'm going to raise my hand so that we can continue to pursue a holistically safe culture at IAC. All right? So you're not the investigative arm. You don't have to know those things for 100%. But for us to be able to step into this truth-seeking process, we need to hear your voice, we need to hear your perceptions, we need to hear your observations. In our sexual misconduct policy, there's a couple of things that are covered, and there's some definitions. There's actually like 28 definitions. These are just a few that we want to share with you. The idea of abuse, sexual contact with a person unable to legally consent. That includes anyone below the age of 18, over 70, or any age unable to care for themselves. We call that a vulnerable population. Coercion, using any form of power, physical, spiritual, for favors. No one at IAC is going to send you an email asking for a favor, right? That's a spam email. Just let us know and we'll alert everybody. We get those like 3 times a week nowadays. But we are not going to be, we want to be aware of coercive behaviors, and we need your help with that. Can you guys think of any other power that someone might use for coercion other than physical or spiritual? Just yell it out real quick. Social, yep. What else? Money. Yeah, financial. Absolutely. Absolutely. We just want to be aware that people can abuse power. And we need help noticing that. We call that coercion. Exploitation, sexual contact or the attempt to develop it in a pastoral relationship. Harassment, any sexual communication. I want to be clear, that's communication. That's not just physical contact. Any sexual communication that is unwelcome. Understanding that unwelcome is determined by the receiver and not the giver. That's a big distinction here that we want to be clear on. Amanda spoke a little bit about mandatory reporting, and there's a small nuance here, but I want us to read it really clearly. Every IAC volunteer is a mandatory reporter related to suspicion of abuse against a child or a vulnerable adult. The nuance that I think Amanda was naming is that there is not a mandatory reporting statute for adults who are not in that vulnerable population, right? So that doesn't exist within our state law. that an adult is a mandatory reporter for another adult. The law requires or stipulates that adults are their own mandatory reporter. That doesn't mean that if you saw an adult experiencing abuse, coercion, exploitation, or harassment, that you shouldn't say something on their behalf. Please do. But there's not a legal stipulation saying that adults are mandatory reporters for other adults. All right? But everyone is a mandatory reporter for a minor or for an adult that's part of a vulnerable population. Mandatory reporter means that if you see something, you must report it, and that you must be the one to report it. Now, IAC recognizes that this can make us feel anxious or nervous or uncomfortable, like I don't really know how to do that, and we are happy to walk with you through the process of reporting. We just can't do it on your behalf. So I know I've been in the church world, and particularly in student ministry now for like 24 or 25 years. I'm hard-pressed to think of any 6-month period where I haven't made a report. Or had an adult come to me and say, hey, I would love to make a report on this. Can you sit with me while I do it? And I just sit there, and we get on the call with the state department, and we just walk through the questions together. The people on the other end of the phone are trained in this. They're excellent in this. I would just highly encourage that you might feel nervous about this. You might feel some anxiety around this. We will help you. But we are all mandatory reporters when it comes to minors and adults that are in vulnerable populations. All right? But we want to help you with that. When you're in the minor protection policy in the basement, you're going to be given a phone number so that you have that in your phone. You just make the phone call and go. All right? And if you want a staff person to walk through that with you, please let us know. Our reporting process. Now, there's a lot more in our sexual misconduct policy. As a follow-up to this training, if you registered, everyone's going to get an email that includes a copy of our sexual misconduct policy and our minor protection policy so that you have the thing in full. Right now, it lives on our website, but frankly, it's tricky to find, and we're working to fix that. Okay? We're working to fix that because that's important for us. But you're going to get a copy of the whole thing. What we wanted to make sure that you were able to hear is some of our reporting process as well. Picture an hourglass that starts really big at the top. There's a huge number of ways that you can give a report of potential sexual misconduct, right? You can have it be verbal, just come up to a staff person, any of us. You can write it. You can make it anonymously. Right now, our anonymous reporting process means like writing a note and then not signing it, using an email that's not associated with you. There are ways to do that. We're working with people on how do we create an anonymous reporting portal that someone could do on our website. We're just talking about how do we do that well so that it's accessible and it's something that we can utilize on our end as well. So there are lots of ways to make a report, and you can make them to any staff person, like Amanda said. It funnels, so it starts big. You can make a report to about anything in a lot of different ways to us on staff, and then it goes narrow, right? So if it's a report about a non-clergy person, so somebody who usually is not in a collar, that goes to the rector. That goes to Pastor Ken. He's the rector. Rector is fancy Anglican for lead pastor. If it's about somebody in a collar, a clergy person, the report, no matter who you give it to, the report goes to the bishop, Bishop Ken Ross. And then he's the one that then if we've gone narrow, it goes wide. All right? So either the bishop, the warden, which is the head of our church council, and the chancellor, which is the diocesan lawyer, they're all notified. So whether it goes to Ken or to the bishop, all those people immediately form the beginning of the team that's going to respond to this. They're the investigative team, and they bring in other people as they have need, based on the type of report that's been made. There is also, and this is really unique and I think powerful for our policy, there's an investigative team, which many policies leave it at that. We're going to find out what the truth was. Our policy also requires that there is a pastoral team made up of different people who are caring for the pastoral needs, the spiritual needs of both the victim and the accused. Right? 2 different teams working with those 2 different people to make sure that we're caring for them holistically. The whole thing, the whole person. So I want to be really clear that to start a report means speaking to any staff person, that you can do that in a written way, in a verbal way, you can do that anonymously. And that's what starts this process. 2 minutes? Thank you. Our investigation, if it's a staff person that's investigated, or if it's a volunteer, they're placed on leave, right? So if it's a volunteer, we ask them to not serve in those contexts. If it's a staff person, they're immediately placed on leave from work during that investigation. Right now, our process has been built so that we aim to have it conclude in 2 months or less. One of the things we know that's most hurtful to victims and to people that have spoken up is to have things linger for a really long time. Because it makes it feel like nobody listened, nobody saw, nobody heard. So we prioritized that expeditious but still complete investigation cycle. In serious accusations, other investigative efforts can be brought to bear that happen from outside the church. And then in an investigation, there is a judgment, either by the rector or by the bishop in consultation with that team. There are a ton of possible outcomes here. Everything from, we see that actually there wasn't a misconduct. And we return to work, and those pastoral teams probably continue going to care for them because that's going to be hard. To like somebody that's clergy having their ordination revoked, and they're not working at a church anymore. And that gets notified to the whole of the Anglican Church in North America. Like so the possibilities are those and everything in between, including, in some cases, the way it impacts our legal system. Those that are guilty of misconduct with children or vulnerable adults never again serve in that population. I'm going to turn it back over to Amanda. One of the reasons that we built a courtyard time was not only for axes and cake, but if you have questions, that's where Ken is the whole time. Is not just to throw axes and eat cake, but so that if you have questions or thoughts or concerns, so that he's in that space so that you can ask him those things. Thank you guys so much.
Yeah, and we don't want anyone to leave today with those lingering questions, feeling like there's not a place for that. So if you don't get them answered in the courtyard, then come to somebody after the fact, because we want to walk with you through that. Okay, you advance the slide there. So just to wrap it up, why are we telling you all of this? It's so that you have clarity. Clarity is kindness. We don't want to have to guess at these things. We want to all be on the same page. And that clarity, we hope, will give you confidence, and all of us confidence, to contribute to creating a culture where safety for the oppressed is valued and championed. And again, this is moving towards something good, towards flourishing. And we desire that we may be a part of Psalm 10, 17 and 18 coming to fruition, caring for one another, especially the most vulnerable in our midst, being part of that kingdom coming here on earth as it is in heaven, and being part of that healing springing up. Guys. Oh yes, your next stop is the fellowship hall. So you have -1 minutes to get there.
So important that you are here. You are saying something really big. You value and revere and care for minors. You want to be part of creating this culture of holistic safety. So thank you for being here. We are going to talk about the minor protection policy together. Before we get to our prayer, I just want to say this is an internal document. So there are most places where you work with kids, this stuff in this document will also apply there. But there are some things that are specific to IAC. So that's what we're going to go over today. If you do not have a copy of the minor protection policy, it is important as a volunteer at IAC that you do have that. So if you don't have a copy, please contact your staff person or your ministry leader and let them know, I need a copy of this, because we're only going to go over bits and pieces of it, not the entire.
It is. Yes.
Cool. Bonnie is going to start us off.
Ma'am?
Oh,
Did you do the
I didn't actually. You should
Okay.
read that.
That's an honor.
Thank you.
Last time,
Heavenly Father, you have blessed us with the joy and care of children. Give us calm strength and patient wisdom as we bring them up, that we may teach them to love whatever is just and true and good, following the example of our Savior Jesus Christ. Amen.
all right. So I want to thank you all for being here. I want to just start out by reminding all of us together that we treat our minors, our children, and our students here with love, respect, and admiration. They aren't some partial human. We all know that. In kid ministry, we like to say, there is no junior Holy Spirit. The full Holy Spirit lives in our children just as he lives in us. And our children are fully co-heirs with us. So I would like to say thank you to all of you who are especially our student and children's volunteers, because you get a myriad of emails from me all of the time. Please sign this. Please fill this out. Please watch these videos. Please watch these. And this is important whether you're involved in liturgical ministries, music ministries, facilities, whatever your involvement here at the church is, even if you aren't directly under the student or children's ministry umbrella. It's important for you to know that the core of our policy is that an adult should absolutely never be alone with a minor, physically or in a virtual space, texting or email. And you may be thinking to yourself, well, how do you get around that? Like, what do you do if a student is texting you? Because they maybe have a scheduling conflict, or maybe they have a crisis. Well, what we do is we immediately get another adult on staff involved in the texting email. We're always going to respond to our children and students with love and with grace and with compassion, but we're never going to respond to them alone. And so you should never be alone with a child who's not biologically or adoptively yours when you're in ministry here at the church. And the place that becomes the biggest stumbling block is taking our preschoolers to the bathroom, which is why we have policies to cover that, and which is why we always have at least 2, if not 3 or 4 adults or older students in the room with our preschoolers to help cover that, which is also why some of you parents get paged on a regular basis to come and handle the bathroom trips. We take the protection of our kids and students here at the church very, very seriously. And obviously you all do too, since you're here on Sunday afternoon.
Yes, as I mentioned, the policy covers a lot of things. We're going to specifically focus on the responding and reporting. Bonnie has, if you want to go to the next slide, there are 5 steps to protecting minors, and Bonnie has just specifically mentioned like screening, training, interacting, monitoring. We're going to mostly focus on that responding and reporting part of the policy. So let's go ahead and get into it. What are we specifically looking for in responding and reporting? These are coming directly from the policy. I've taken this from the policy, and all these next slides will be featured. They are also featured in the policy, but in more extensive detail. So that's why it's so important that you have a copy. We are reporting or responding to incidents that we become aware of that involve sexually inappropriate exchanges involving minors or adults. When we become aware of or involved in sexual misconduct involving a student by a clergy person, a staff member, or a volunteer. When we become aware of or we ourselves are arrested or convicted of child abuse, commit an act of child abuse, or are diagnosed with a paraphilic psychological condition, or we become aware of another person attending our church in our household who are arrested, charged, or diagnosed with a paraphilic psychological condition. We can go ahead and go to the next slide. If we become aware of any of these things, and we become aware of it through an interaction with a minor, we need to know how to respond to the person disclosing this information. This is really serious stuff that can be disclosed, and we want to hold it with care. And we also, all of this is centered around that value of love. And so how do we respond with love and care when someone discloses something like this to us? These are just a couple of examples from the policy, but some of the ones that I wanted to highlight were keeping calm and listening to the person disclosing the information, the victim, letting the student know that he or she is believed, ensuring that that abuse was not their fault, and avoiding questions that would make the student feel responsible. One of the questions that someone asked in the last session was, how do I know if a question is assuming fault? There are examples of questions in the minor protection policy. The one that I thought of was asking the question, how long has this been going on? Even though that might seem like an innocent question, the victim can assume fault by thinking, oh man, this has been happening for 2 years now. Why did I not disclose this information earlier? We don't want to do that. We don't want, this is not their fault that this has happened to them. So yeah, we can go on to the next slide. Okay, this is specifically talking about internal reporting. We have a document at the end of the policy that is an internal reporting document. It asks questions of an encounter that you've had, information that you've become aware of, or a information that has been disclosed to you. It asks specifics about like the form of abuse, and if you've done our Ministry Safe training videos, you have a really clear understanding of what types of abuse there are. First, we immediately respond to or report to the rector or ministry supervisor. Ministry supervisor is the staff person responsible or like in charge, responsible for the ministry that you serve in. One of the reasons we do this is because we can have information given to us, we can witness something, and there can be maybe question marks going off in our head. What do I do with this information? I'm not sure. When we disclose to our staff supervisor or to the rector, that's Pastor Ken, we're able to discern that together. We're not asked to do it alone. And then together you can think of next steps. Is this something that we want to report internally so we know, okay, here's something maybe minor that happened here, and then if something happens later, we have connecting points internally. If a child's safety is at risk, we must report to the state. We are mandatory reporters as volunteers. Therefore, volunteers make the report directly to the appropriate state authority. If you are the person that has seen something, been given information, become aware of something, you have to be the person to report. It cannot be the staff supervisor or the ministry leader that does that reporting for you. It may apply that they make a secondary report, but we need your primary voice when something like this happens. Okay, so everyone should grab their phones. If you were at this training last year, then you probably already have this number in your phone. This is the number that we call when we are reporting to the state. It's Colorado for Kids, and if you wanted to go to the website, they have more information on how to report, when to report to the state. But it's important that we have this. It says in the policy, if a child's safety is at risk, we are not upholding the integrity of what, like, we are not, one of the ways that we are upholding the integrity of our church and of our ministry and of this culture of holistic safety is reporting to the state, because they are able to respond to that information that we're not able to. They are the professionals in that. So, yeah, we can go to the next slide. Okay, if you are a volunteer within Kid Ministry and you have ever had the minor protection policy meeting with Maddie, then this is usually the part where I cry. I'm not going to cry today. I didn't cry the last one, but the reason I cry is because these words are so true. They're so well written. I don't think I could say it better myself. But what you guys are saying yes to is really important. You get to be part of the formation of minors, and you get to be a healthy example of what it looks like to have a relationship with an adult. So I want to say, we all want to say thank you. So I'm going to read this over you. Through the Spirit, you are shepherding into being the glorious purposes of God for humanity. We thank God for your ministry. You are Christ's ambassadors in sharing his love, respect, admiration, and reverence for his children. You are engaging with Christian disciples at an especially formative time of life. So, thank you. We wanted to leave space for questions because this is a lot of information. One of the reasons I think the policy starts with the College for the Care of Children is it's a reminder that we're not doing this out of fear. We're doing it out of this value of love, respect, reverence, admiration for children. So, yeah, with that said, it still is heavy information and you probably have questions. So in this space, you can ask questions about interacting. The policy, it covers extensively what happens in interacting. I've done several of these meetings of walking through the policy. I feel pretty familiar with it and can try to point you in the right direction with those questions. Also asking about reporting, asking about who's the staff person, the ministry supervisor that's head of my ministry, any questions like that we want to give space for. So now is the time. Chelsea.
Would you mind clarifying the difference between the mandatory reporting to the church and mandatory reporting to the state, and how those processes are different, how they overlap, and then if both of them are required for every incident?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it is always a good rule of thumb to report something if you feel uneasy about it. And what I mean by that is internally reporting to your staff or your ministry supervisor, so that you can discern together what are the best next steps in this. Yeah, it always is. One thing that I said to someone in the last session was the authorities, the state licensed people know what to do with the information that we give. And so if we feel uneasy about something, it does not hurt to call and make a report. One of those first slides on responding and reporting that said, if you become aware of sexual encounters between minors, those 4 things that were listed, any of those are reported to the state, if that brings clarity. So,
can we go back there?
Oh yeah, can you go back? So, yes. Like, retweet everything that Shelby just said. Because it is, if the child's safety is at risk, we must report to the state. It is not, we again, all of this is coming, if we are believing that children need to be respected and revered, we have to love them by reporting to the state if their safety is at risk. So any of these things are reported to the state.
Yeah, I think maybe what the question is why is there sometimes a criminal investigation internally versus not? And so if any of these things, or if something were to be observed or to happen like at church camp, or here on the property, yes, that would involve both a legal, like the police investigation, as well as an investigative team coming to the church to to work through whatever they needed to work through. Sometimes what we end up needing to report, however, might be something that a child tells us is happening at home, or something that has happened at school or the park. And so then that doesn't really require a criminal investigation here at the church. It requires us to make the good faith report that this child has perhaps said an older child at the park is molesting them, or they're being hit at home, that sort of thing, which then doesn't require a criminal investigation here because it's not really involving our people necessarily. Does that make sense?
Thank you for the question. Yeah, Rebecca.
Well, and I think I kind of hear you saying like a both and approach. Like the church is going to want to know, right? But also I think it's realistic to say we may not know what's safe or not, and we aren't really trained always to, see what's grooming, every state has different views of even what abuse is, and there's different categorizations. So probably it's a good approach to also just know all of us are empowered to go directly to police if they feel like if they don't know, if they're not sure, but then also the church would want to know for various reasons as well. Is that what I'm understanding?
Yes.
Right? Okay.
Yeah. Thanks. Chase.
You have 2 minutes.
Oh, thanks. Yeah.
I was just going to say too, I'm an emergency room nurse, and so I'm a little bit familiar with some of this process. And one of the things that I've been taught, which has helped me, is that when I first got into that field, and we're in these situations where I was like, well, I'm not really sure what's going on. Do I report? Do I not report? It helped me to kind of learn about some of the process that the state goes through, and by reporting something, that does not mean that a person's life is going to be ruined, that suddenly someone's going to go to jail. Like, they're looking for patterns, they're looking for trends, they're looking for one particular family maybe being flagged multiple times, but maybe you're that 5th person that calls something to their attention, and that's really something that needs to be investigated. So I just remember, from my perspective, that was hard in the beginning, because you're worried, what if I'm wrong? What if I'm ruining someone's life? If anything, the state process is probably a little bit errs on the side of not really being super hard on, or not being, like they're not just jumping in and arresting people, like they're really doing their diligence. And if anything, some things might slip through the cracks because of that.
Yeah.
But just to not be afraid to report that you're going to ruin a family's life if you're wrong.
Yeah. Yes.
I think it's also.
Oh, sorry.
I think it's also important to just know that internal reporting, if you have minor protection policies that aren't breaking the law, but still should be brought to leaders' attention.
Yes.
So if you see volunteer one-on-one, that's not, there's nothing illegal about that, but it can be a red flag to that part of it should also be reported and delineated.
That's a really good point. Thanks. Yeah.
To figure out from what you said, not only to not be afraid of reporting because you might ruin a family's life, if there is abuse going on, the abuser's already done that. So try to put your mind in that perspective. I've had to report something before, and that's what was pointed out to me, and that's what helped me pull the trigger and do it. So.
Thanks. I'm getting this signal. Go ahead.
Sorry, real quick. In a different vein, if there is an immediate medical need after an incident, if it's evaluation or if it's care, is there a point of contact in the midst of the reporting process that we have medically?
911.
That's a good question. Within the policy, this, I'm just going to be completely honest with you. I'm not sure, but this is a living document. So if you read the policy, there are contacts listed at the end right before the internal reporting document, and it's just a list of, here's where you can go to learn more about how to spot a perpetrator and different resources like that. But that would probably be a really good resource to add if it's not there. I'm not 100% sure. Do you mean specifically, can you elaborate a bit more? What would be the difference between what you're thinking of in 911?
I think it's just, is there a difference? In the midst of the reporting process, do we have to go through certain channels medically,
Okay.
if that was a need?
Yeah.
But it may not be. I mean, that's what I'm asking.
Okay.
Because I don't know.
Cool.
And I would just say too, as an emergency room nurse, like I would just, if there's a medical need, just call 911. Like there were, even like we deal with that sort of stuff all the time, whether it's has to do with abuse or not. We're trained in that as well.
Yeah.
We have specific nurses who are trained in investigating it too, and so like I would just like if there's medical issues, just don't hesitate. It's like it'll be taken care of.
Cool.
We have a whole program active with the wind.